It is time to talk about the Danny situation. A number of reports and things have come out over the last week, culminating with Arsh's kind of one that came out this weekend. And I don't have any personally new information to really add to it, but I've been following it closely, as well as people's responses to these on Reddit and Twitter and whatnot. And I do feel like I have something to add maybe in helping to navigate some of the information that has come out, because there has been basically three separate things between the Thornton video, the Richard Lewis article, and Arsh's article. And some conflicting information does exist between them, and it feels like maybe some of the information hasn't been fully read. If people skimmed the article, Reddit's not always the best about reading it. So hopefully I can help chime in there and help navigate some of this conversation. And I think it's important to do this because seeing some of the reaction, it feels like there's a case of kind of just painting some individuals as like the boogeymen of a big evil corpo at the sea level. And while there is definitely some truth to that, and you'll see when we talk about it, it also ignores some of the systematic failings that led to that point. And if you are really concerned about making sure that this doesn't happen to another bright, young, promising player, then you really have to address it more on that systemic level, and you can't push all of the problems onto bad actors who don't seem to have cropped up until the very end. Now you can argue that was an intention prior to that, and that's the systemic part. And it's not just like the horrible decisions that were made right at the end that really broke him. It was the entire lead up to that, and that's what I want to kind of talk about here. Being a pro gamer is cool. I don't think there's really any doubt about that. I think that there are moments where it is just incredible, where you're traveling all around the world, you have this kind of like fame and fortune following you around, you're kind of living this good life. But there is this downside to it, which is sometimes not taken as seriously as it probably should be, both by the community and even the people that are experiencing it. Like you just kind of like, it's just what it is, and you kind of move through it. But there are these really low points where things are not working well for you as a pro player. Your team is in shambles. You're devoting what is basically your entire life at this point to this. And so like when this one thing that is your entire life starts going sour, the rest of your life feels pretty terrible as well. So I don't want to make it sound like there aren't all these positives to being a pro player and you're still making handsome money, or to say that there isn't stress in normal jobs, because a lot of people at some point are going to have this kind of feeling probably when they have to work really long hours, if a deadline's coming up, or if there's like restructuring going on at your company, like people are getting laid off. A lot of people are going to have these feelings. I think what makes it slightly unique in the pro player case is, like a normal job might only feel that within their immediate sphere of people, but for pro players it becomes kind of all consuming, because it's also your personal life and the online life that you see, and there's not really an escape from it that might exist, as well as the fact that like if you're doing work, you are usually not getting judged by a massive group of people online who all have their own opinions. I would compare being a pro player to like, imagine when you were a student potentially and you had your finals coming up. And let's say you really cared. Some students might not care, but for people who did care, you had that stress that was like eating at the pit of your stomach the entire week as you go into your finals and you take them. The difference is, for a pro player, that usually happens twice a week, every week, for 9 weeks at a time, and maybe onwards. And not only do you have to get your grades back, did you pass or fail, did you win the game or lose the game, but also, again, this online community is there judging you the entire time. And again, because you devote your whole life to this, upwards of 60 to 80 hours a week. You've moved across the country. It's very hard to keep up with what might have been your friend group before. Most of your friends are just going to be your teammates, or maybe other people in the league, or your coaches, or whoever. You might not be as close to your family as you used to. It might be harder to find time to talk with them. Like, you become very inducted into this lifestyle where there's really not that many other support systems around you to step out of that level of stress. And that's why it can become so all-consuming that you start to have breakdowns or physiological reactions to that level of stress. The reason this systemic angle is important is because it's probably happening to a lot more players even currently right now than is well known to the public. And it's something that's always been in the history of League Esports, at least as far as I've been around. And so that's why it's important to understand, like, this isn't like an isolated case of someone getting mentally burnt out and overstressed. Though I don't think it always reaches as far as it might go due to the unique circumstances of Danny's situation and some of the management at the end. The reality is that this is like a pretty prevalent thing, and it's good to talk about. These numbers I'm about to say are hypothetical based off my experience. It would be awesome if the Players Association actually like did a little poll and actually got these numbers for certain. But here's my guess about how prevalent burnout or mental stress. And I don't just mean like being like anxious. I mean like actually having physiological responses. That can be loss of appetite, loss of sleep, it could be throwing up, it could be panic attacks, it could be stress rashes, it could be any number of these kinds of like conditions that can crop up from the amount of pressure that comes from being a pro player. I would speculate that 90% of pros, maybe more, have at some point had some sort of reaction to the stress that they're under. I would also guess that right now, like 30% of the pros, maybe more, maybe less, who knows exactly, are feeling some effects of this right now. Again, it can be anything in that gamut, anywhere in between. You look at the players on Immortals, Dignitas, 100 Thieves, Team Liquid, the amount of pressure that they put on themselves. I would not be shocked if a lot of the players on these teams are not feeling it a little bit themselves. And even on the upper tier teams, as we saw with the Danny situation in EG in summer 2022, they were crushing it in summer. They were the best team hands down. That's the story we were telling. And yet he was still feeling that pressure and the burnout that came from a long season and whatnot. So it's not just the lower tier teams that can sometimes feel this amount of pressure that it starts causing you to feel a certain way. I can speak to this firsthand myself. When I was on Curse and Team Liquid, it was something I mentioned on Hotline League, but I'll bring it up again here in case you didn't see it. But like during that time, a number of us had things that were happening. Voyboy was throwing up before games. Dom had panic attacks sometimes. Even before joining, I had trouble eating in the mornings. I usually couldn't eat until late afternoon. And if I had a really stressful day or I ate too quickly or something went wrong, I would often throw up. I'm pretty sure Quas and Cop mentioned having things as well. Trouble sleeping, whatever it is, just a restless mind. Like it was very prevalent on that team because we, during like portions of that year, were on the verge of relegations. We were, struggling in the regular season, and like that pressure would just compound on you. And for me, I moved across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. I was, working probably 80 hours a week. If you saw my schedule when I showed that a couple months ago in a different Blame game, I was sleeping in a closet and I was making close to no money. So like I was all in. And so when we had a bad weekend, there was like nothing else I would do. I would sit in my room and I'd watch IMDb's top 100. That's like what I did to de-stress back then. And yeah, I did not cope with that stress well. I was 23, 24 years old. And I think that's even older than a lot of the pro players. That's more experience than some of them have as they're going through these kinds of experiences. There's not relegation now, but of course there's investors and a lot more extra money put into the scene and whatnot. So I think it's something that is probably a feeling that a lot of pro players go through at some point. Exactly how it manifests for them will be different. Who knows? The scales of that manifestation will be different as well. But the reality is that there are a ton of people in the scene over the history and probably right now who are going through some of these things. The thing is, back when I was doing that, it was a transition period a little bit for League of Legends. Season 1 and Season 2 were just player-run orgs. They weren't really orgs, they were just groups of people playing together who would like to split up the money, and it's like a lot of honor systems. There probably weren't that many contracts. Some of the more forward-thinking people, like on TSM with Reggie and Hotshot, maybe made LLCs or even incorporated or something, and began to do that. And it wasn't until Season 3 with the LCS that they had to start giving money to teams to live in homes. But you could see even from Team Marn, it wasn't taken very seriously. And Season 4, Season 5 was around when we started to become companies, but we're still doing plenty of things that were probably pretty shady, and like I can say comfortably that like most people I've worked with in esports, we probably broke some law where like one of us could sue the other person if you really wanted to. I could probably sue almost every person that I've worked with in my career if like I could find some like little thing that like wasn't up to snuff. I mean, like there's lots of reports that come out even now about content teams and like the amount of time that they're expected to always be on call. Like it's just kind of how esports is. There's a lot of things that would not fly in traditional corporate America or anywhere really. The difference in my situation was it was in Season 4 and Season 5 when there was really not that much money around to look out for people the way that it should be the case now. The fact that it is still so prevalent is why I say it's a systemic problem that we need to address and not just this hyper-specific Danny situation, because it's probably something that a lot of people have seen or experienced themselves before, and it makes it, because it's so normalized in the scene, to downplay the severity of it. And it's hard to know exactly how much it is impacting any one individual, because we've all kind of seen it and probably been through it before ourselves, especially people on the ground floor. A lot of us also don't want to cause trouble. So like I can speak for myself, and I assume it's true for a lot of people, you downplay how much of a problem it is. I never told my parents about the problems that I had until I was through them, because I started seeing a therapist and stuff like that. But I had to make that choice like 5 or 6 years after going through this, like where I was like, I should probably really do something about this. This is not normal. But like I didn't tell a lot of people close to me in my life, and the other people who knew, and like I knew Dom's thing and voicing, it was almost like you joked about it, and like no one took it super serious. And like I don't know if that's the case that it still is now for some of these people playing in this day and age, but like if that's the case, that's a huge problem. And like esports should have leveled up and have more support system for us, because a lot of us are not going to say, yeah, I need help, and we'll downplay it. And that's why you need a lot of the times for younger people and kids to be that like authority figure who knows what's best for them, even when they themselves do not want that thing. And so in the case of Danny, for example, if he was needing time off in scrims because he was feeling this way, and you ask him, hey, are you okay? Most of us are going to say, yeah, I'm fine. I'll get over it. This, or, you know, like I can tough it out. And in reality, you need someone who's the mature person in that room to step in and say, no, you should really be doing this other thing. The reason this is really difficult is because a lot of the people running these teams and stuff on like the ground floor, other coaches and some team managers, a lot of them are not much older than the pros that are the ones suffering, or these people might be suffering themselves. But the reality is that we've tried in the past in esports to bring in people from outside of esports in, like other coaches or people, and it hasn't really ever worked. As much as we want it to work, it doesn't really work. And you need people who have that expertise in the League of Legends scene and in the game to be the ones at the ground floor kind of making decisions and running things, because that part is actually the harder skill set to replicate. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be other people in supporting roles who can bring those things that we need, like a psychologist. And that's why I pushed back a little bit on the boogeyman that was supposedly, you know, at the end of the season, who broke Danny in some of the upper management roles, and wanted to talk more about some of the stuff that's going on over the course of the season when he's supposedly needing breaks from scrims and stuff like that because he is mentally worn out. And you need to fix the problem then, before it gets to the point where he can be broken down by horrible decision making by those upper management people. And so like that's the part that I think, big picture, if there's anything to take away, is making sure that you are able to have more support for pro players that, even when they might not admit that they need it, actually helping them out. And it sounds like that might have been there a little bit earlier on based off these reports in spring, but like it kind of dropped off. And especially in the case of Danny, where the whole team is doing well around him, it's especially telling that something was off. And you can see, if there's one like insidious part of this, it's the slow decline of interest and duty that these people are supposed to be there for. In the report by R, she's talking about someone skipping meetings and not paying attention as these like Danny issues were being flagged a little bit. Like that's the real problem. Those insidious little slips of your job where you don't do the thing that you're supposed to do leads to the moments where there's these big breaking points that you then make even worse decisions that compound issues. But it's a slide to get there. And if you fix those really small seeming things at the beginning where someone's just not really doing their job, suddenly that becomes a problem later. And that's the part that really will help a lot more people, is if everyone is taking these moments seriously that look like little things that you can wave off because they haven't broken yet. Especially since for a lot of players, they don't end up breaking down quite as heavily as Danny did here. I mean, the reality is we haven't seen that many cases like Danny where someone has this big collapse. A lot of the times you feel like shit and your gameplay drops and you hate your life for something, but at the end of the day, you don't end up having to completely step away. And so like that's another thing that can make it like harder to judge on the outside for a lot of the other people, is like, well, I got through it. Is this guy going to get through it? You can't measure everyone with the same stick or assume that they're going through the same things when they're clearly not. And it just makes it a very difficult situation to read accurately, which is why you need actual professionals to be doing that, and not like coaches and players who are obviously not equipped to deal with that. This is still going on this year, given the fact that Blaze Olive stepped back. I reached out to him to make sure this was a little bit okay to talk about, but it is, again, stress and mental health related, wanting to step back because you just start feeling so negative and stressed out about just the game that you need to remove yourself from the situation. And this level that pro players are going through, I don't think that they are always properly supported, I would reckon. And it's something that, you know, can affect more people in the future than just a couple bad actors at the top. One point of disagreement between Thorne and Richard Lewis's thing and Arsh's was exactly when Danny caved, I guess is the way to put it, because he was struggling in Summer Split, but it seems like he was telling everyone around him that he was okay. He didn't really need help. He would just take some days off and they wouldn't scrim or something like that. And obviously that's not okay, but the team thought that he could maybe power through it, it sounds like, and he was saying that himself, which again, you need a professional to really evaluate that. But that seemed to be the story. And some people were saying that, oh, the team knew that he wasn't going to be all right and that they should have put a sub on the playoff roster lock. But according to Arsh's timeline, Danny didn't say that he didn't want to play until after playoffs had started, and potentially after the C9 series, maybe before. The timeline right here isn't super clear. And I think you can say like, oh, you really should have known that you should have put a sub in for Danny But it sounds like, based off some of the conversations, no one wanted to play with Cowrie, and they knew that he was not, he was toxic and someone that they didn't want to play with. And if Danny was telling you he was fine, I could see how this is not this nefarious, evil thing where they were pretending like they didn't have a backup sub for Danny. Given the prevalence of stress and mental health issues and physiological reactions that exist in the scene, I can see a world where people are like, oh, this is like sadly kind of par for the course and he'll be okay, not realizing how significant it was. The fact that Danny was malnourished and not eating enough is something that I'm surprised could get through the cracks at all and not get reported up more seriously, because like I was always roughly aware of when and what people were eating when I was on a team, and like you were so close that it's like I feel like would be easy to notice if someone like wasn't eating, not going to team dinners and all this kind of stuff. It's a little shocking to me that it could get that bad and not be taken more seriously. Now, maybe I'm being too charitable in my interpretation of this, but I think it's very understandable to think that the people who are just on the, again, ground floor level of the team trying to operate and become as good as you can possibly be would think that this is something that they can get through. And to kind of back up this line of thinking, it was reported by Arsh that Peter Dunn was actually still like okay with Danny playing until after the TSM series, which was after the Cloud9 loss. So it took some time before people really on the team understood the severity of it and wanted to make this substitution happen. It sounds like something that people were almost 100% on board with, this being their starting roster heading into summer split playoffs, which is why they did not ask for Cowrie as a sub. You can again say if you're really forward thinking you should have seen it happening, but again, it doesn't sound like anyone wanted to play with Cowrie. He's gone now for that reason. Again, this isn't shade at Peter because I really like him and I have a feeling that he did want the best for the team and Danny, but it shows how even well-meaning people can have things go by them and not see everything that's happening. This brings me to the people who did not seem to have good intentions. Andrew Barton, Nicole, GamerDoc, I'm not exactly sure who exactly said what, but based off the things that Arsh reported, if they're even halfway true in the vitriol and disdain for a person, then this is absolutely something that should be looked into, because this is terrifying that these are the people kind of making decisions for kids who are honestly not the most forward thinking for their health and well-being. The great Terry Pratchett wrote, "Evil begins when you begin to treat people as things." And it sounds like they started to treat Danny like a commodity. I can't say as a coach, I haven't pushed people when they were saying they were tired or something like that. And anyone who's been in a competitive environment has had that moment where even though you feel done, you push for one more. But this is clearly going a step beyond that. If teams are being run this way, where upper management is basically listening to someone say, I can't do this anymore, and saying, you have to, then there are potentially huge problems brewing under the surface that could have been much worse. Esports has had its share of tragedies before, and while it's awful seeing a bright prospect like Danny grinded down until he had to step away and it's tragic, it's not nearly as bad as it could have been if this was kind of the environment that some people were playing in. That's the one positive in all of this, is that he can hopefully recover and either come back or go to streaming or do whatever he wants in his life, but it's not hard to imagine this taking an even more significant turn. Between the three different things that have come out over the past week, it does seem like there's some conflicting information of exactly who was responsible for what, and that's why I hope this isn't the end of this situation. That's gonna do it for this episode. Hopefully you guys found it valuable in terms of talking about the things that go on within the ecosystem, kind of behind the scenes, and my perspective on this situation. That's gonna do it for this episode. I might do a 100 Thieves one as well, but who knows. Anyways, that's gonna do it for me. See ya.
It's the Lunar Revel Party here at LCS. We just wrapped up a round robin one. I don't know how many weeks it's been since this outro was filmed. Maybe you're like, Travis, you really need to film some new outros, but I don't, because I'm my own man and I employ myself. And you know how I employ myself? Because Alienware helps me out. And you can check out their link in the description below to continue helping me out. But maybe you think I need to make more outros, in which case maybe you should. No, you should. Go check out alienware.com/Travis. Link in the description.